Hello, everyone. Today, let us talk about children and adolescent literature. And our discussion will be divided into several main parts. The first one is the introduction to the world of children's literature, followed by the elements of quality children's literature. Third, the art of illustration and the early childhood books. The fourth part of our discussion today will be traditional and modern literature. We also have the animal fantasy and contemporary realistic fiction. Then another part of our discussion will be biography, autobiography, and informational books, understanding young adult literature, evaluating and selecting young adult literature. And then we will also have a discussion on how to connect adolescents with their literature. And finally, last but not the least, exploring young adult literature. Okay, so let us start with our first topic, introduction to the world of children's literature. Let us start with the definition of children's literature. Let me read. Children's literature or literature for the children is good quality trade books for children from birth to adolescence, covering topics of relevance and interest to the children of those ages through prose and poetry or fiction and non-fiction. So when we say children's literature, we are referring to those wide variety of stories and reading materials that have relevance and interest to the children of those ages. That's why we have stories that are about um, about toys, about the children per se, because those are the characters. Those are the types of stories that they like, that they have interests with. And then we also have stories that have moral lessons, because these are the stories or topics of relevance to those children of those ages. So children's literature can be a story or a prose, or it can be poetry, and it can also be, of course, fiction or work of art of someone's imagination, or it can be non-fiction as well. Those that are intended for informational purposes and based on facts. Okay, let us talk about more about children's literature. So when we say trade book, by the way, by design and content, is primarily for the purpose of entertainment and information. Trade books are often referred to as library books and story books. They are often uh, there are they are often different. Okay, so we have textbooks. Sometimes we also have um, different types of books intended for the children. Okay, so children's literature can be identified based on the following, and it is suggested that the following will be present in every children's literature, if not all. Okay, so in terms of content, children's literature shows experiences of childhood set in the past, present, or future. Examples, we have enjoying birthday parties. Okay, so if we will go back to the definition of children's literature, of course, enjoying birthday parties are something that are in relevance and um, something that they have interest with, because it's about them. It's about their experiences as a child, because they want to relate with their peers. Okay, that's why if you will notice in children's literature, most of the characters there are children as well. Why? because they have connection with these characters, and they have interest with these types of characters. Obviously, children won't have any interest in reading stories about adults. Okay, some might have interest in reading about those, but most of them will obviously enjoy reading stories about them, about someone, or about a character that they will be able to relate with. Okay. Next, we also have anticipating um, adulthood, or others call it the coming of age literatures. So how are they going to grow from child to adolescent to adulthood? So these are stories of relevance for them. Getting a new pet, enduring siblings, of course, that is something about uh, their experiences as well. So it's something that they will be able to relate with, and also have dealing with family situations. So of course, we are talking about their experiences there, regardless of whether it is in the past, the present, or future. Okay. Next, another common content of children's literature, things that are of interest to children. So ano na ba yung mga yun? We have dinosaurs, we have toys, we have pets. We also have another example here, Egyptian mummies, or um, history. They also like history, of course. Right? Hindi lang halata, pero they like browsing stories about history. That's why we also have what they call historical fiction that are also intended for the children. And one good thing about historical literature is that it's not just for scholars, it's not just for students in the college level. Okay, so there are also literatures that are about history, but still gets the interest of the young readers. So that is a concept that um, other teachers should also try to consider. So they learn about history, but at the same time, they also enjoy reading and appreciate literature. And of course, there are other benefits like building their vocabulary, enhancing their comprehension skills. Okay, next. So, manner of children's literature. How stories are being told in children's literature. So, first one, stories are told in forthright, humorous, and suspenseful manner. Stories are told in nostalgic or overly sentimental terms, or inappropriate. So, children's literature way or style of being narrated to the intended audience, which are the children, is they are straightforward, okay? And they are portrayed in a humorous way and in a suspenseful manner, okay? So that is in order for them to get the attention of their intended readers. So if that is straightforward, the children will be able to understand it clearly and right away. And it is humorous in sense because obviously children love to um, to laugh, right? They want to enjoy. They want to just be a child and laugh and enjoy and be happy with what they are doing. And suspenseful manner in such a sense that they will be hooked to continue reading, or continue listening to someone who is reading for them, because children's literature in some cases are intended to be read to the children, because sometimes in some cases, or in um, a lot of cases, this children do not know how to read yet. So what are we going to do? Hindi naman po hindi sila marunong magbasa, hindi na sila pwedeng ma-introduce sa literatures. So as early as 2 years old or probably even younger, we should already introduce them to different types of stories. And how are we going to do that? We are the ones who will read it for them. And we will um, use different strategies on how we are going to do that. That will still hook their interest and in such a way that they will still appreciate literature. Next stories should emphasize the hope for a better future rather than hopelessness and utter despair of the moment. Okay, so it should have positive vibes for them. Okay, that's why most children's literature have moral lessons. Okay, we don't want our children to read negative literatures. We don't want them to have literatures that will only cause them negative things that it might affect their mindset about things. So these are children, and we want them um, to be hopeful of the future, right? To be positive on the things around them, that they will be able to do things, that everything will be okay, that um, life is happy, that life is full of amazing things, and so on. So ayaw naman natin na ang matututunan ng mga bata is something na hindi nila ikakaangat in the future. Kaya nga natin sila tinuturuan para sa tama, kaysa naman tinuturuan para mali sila sa landas. Okay? That's why in the history of children's literature, what happened? Iniiwasan nila yung mga stories that are inappropriate to their age. Okay? Let's proceed. So these are once again the stories for the children. So this time let us talk about the elements of quality children's literature. Okay, again, so children's literature is intended, let's have a review. Children's literature is intended for the purpose of entertainment and information. So they will be entertained, but at the same time, they also learn. Right? So quality children's literature. So the best children's literature books offer readers enjoyment as well as memorable characters and situations and valuable insights into human condition. So it is important that they will enjoy literature whenever we are reading it for them or they are reading it themselves. And it is also important that we incorporate characters that they will be able to relate with. Diba? Kung titingnan natin yung mga, let's say sa mga cartoons muna tayo. Okay? Bakit gusto nila si San Goku? Bakit merong Naruto? Bakit merong sa Pokemon, characters in Pokemon, Batman, Superman, Peppa Pig, and so on. Okay? Bakit sila sikat? Because of the characters. They can identify, they can remember the different characters in these stories. Okay? And they also remember the situations that they are in. Okay? And it is important that in children's literature, we have to choose the characters there because they will emulate these characters. They will idolize these characters. So if the characters that are emphasized in a particular story is someone that they shouldn't learn with, then magkakaproblema tayo. Right? So quality children's literature uh, has this characters as their role models. Okay, so let us be careful in choosing a story with a character in it. It should give them hope and positive vibes and other inspirations in life. Okay, let's continue. So quality children's literature. First, we have the originality and importance of ideas. Right. So in terms of originality, it is important that you will provide it with something that are new for them. Okay, it might not be new for us because we've been exposed to different literatures, different stories, and most likely alam na natin yung mga plots, conflicts, common concepts and styles in literature. But look for something that are new for them in order for them to have interest in it. Okay, and of course, importance of ideas. Look for stories that will inspire them, that will give them hope. Look for literatures that will give them information, regardless of whether it is fiction or non-fiction. Literature pa rin naman matatawag yung mga informational uh, materials. Okay? So, pwede pa rin natin gamitin yung mga yun. But just make sure that we will present those information, those non-fiction materials in a interesting way para tuloy-tuloy silang magbasa or tuloy-tuloy silang makinig sa mga sinasabi mong information sa kanila. Okay? Next, we also have the use of imaginative languages. Okay, that is also important in children's literature. And then the beauty of literary and artistic style. So we have different styles that we can use in children's literature. So one, we have repetition. Right? So kung mapapansin natin in children's literature, there are a lot of repetitions. It may be repetition of word, repetition of phrase, repetition of a whole sentence, or repetition of specific sound only, let's say alliteration. So these are something that are of interest of the children. Okay? Pagka may mga repetition in specific literature, sometimes they find a way to sing it. Kasi magandang ulit-ulitan yung mga repetitions. And aside from that, mas madali nilang natatandaan if the words or phrases or sentences are being repeated. Okay, papansin niyo mga sa mga nursery rhymes, 'di ba? Marami doon yung mga sounds na paulit-ulit. So that is one style in children's literature. What else? The use of language that are easily understood by the children. So these are also another consideration, another style in writing children's literature. Contrary to adult literature, sometimes we tend to write something that will still have other meanings, deeper meanings on it. Okay, sometimes we don't use literal comprehension in adult literature. So the readers will have to think, will have to analyze a specific line in order for them to understand it. However, in most children's literature, these are straightforward use of the language, literal comprehension ang kailangan mo nila. Okay, next. So no children's literature or children usually enjoy reading fast-moving, adventure-filled, and easily predictable stories. These works have won no literary prizes, but they encourage children to read independently and read more. Okay? So they like fast-moving, adventure-filled, and easily predictable stories. Why? Obviously, they don't want to get bored, and it will keep them excited on what is about to happen in the story. And it is presented in a predictable way because their comprehensions are not as complex as what as adults. So mas okay din minsan if we present them with this kind of styles in stories. Okay, fast moving and adventure filled. It's more of action. Okay, children's literature should be more of actions of the characters or actions in the story per se. Okay, they don't want narration na kagaya sa ating mga literatures intended for the adults. If you can compare children's literature with adult literatures, minsan sa adult literature, that is more on description. Okay? Description of, let's say, the setting, description of the emotion of the characters, description of the past of the character, the mindset, ito yung tinatawag nilang um, the consciousness type of literature, di nila gusto yon. However, in children's literature, they want more actions. Okay? Kaya nga in children's literature, madalang yung narration lang, description lang. It's more of what is happening in the story. Ano yung ginagawa ng mga characters in the story. Okay? Kaysa more on descriptions. Pwede more on descriptions, but they are more interested in actions in children's literature. Mabubore kasi sila hindi. Okay, let's proceed. Okay, so values of children's literature. So they will benefit personally by reading stories. Okay, so there are different values of literature to children. Personal value, we have enjoyment, we have imagination, inspiration, vicarious experience, understanding, empathy, cultural heritage, moral reasoning, and literary and artistic preferences. So whenever they are reading stories, they enjoy. They appreciate something other than playing mobile games. Other than that, it is something that they can also enjoy. Okay, if it is being read to them, matutuwa pa rin naman sila. As long as maayos yung pagkaka-narrate sa kanila ng mga stories or information. Okay, it gives them inspiration and additional imagination. Okay, so na-inspire sila sa mga binabasa sa kanila or sa mga binabasa nila, and that is something that we should really check. Dapat natututo sila sa mga binabasa nila. It gives them experience, additional experiences whenever they are reading stories. Okay, they also have better understanding and empathy towards others because different types of characteristics of individuals are being portrayed in different stories. So if they have wide variety of stories with wide variety of characters presented there, then they will have better understanding of other people around them. Okay? So hindi lang puro sarili nila iniisip nila, but rather they know how they feel, they know where they're coming from, probably not as understanding as the adults, but san ba sila mag-uumpisa? Okay? They also have more information about their culture, why certain group of people act this way and others act those ways. So That is also true literature. So kahit hindi sila magpunta ng Japan, ng Korea, or in other countries or in other parts of our country, they will still have an idea why these people um, act those ways. Okay? They also have benefits in terms of moral lesson. That's why we should choose stories with moral lessons, with lessons. Right? Kasi dito sila matututo din. But sometimes hindi na kasi sila nakikinig sa mga pangaral lang. Okay? Magmumukhang negative sa kanila kung ganun yung ginagawa natin. So why not choose a story and yung gusto mong pangaral para sa kanila, naka-embed dun sa story na inanarrate natin sa kanila, ikwento natin sa kanila, or na babasahin nila. So, we're able to indirectly teach them through these literatures. Okay? And then, slowly but surely, they already know their literary and artistic preferences. Okay? Because they are provided with literatures with a lot of artistic and literary styles. So as early as a child, nakakapili na sila na alam na rin nila yung mga different styles at ano yung mga gusto nilang styles of writing. Okay? And definitely in the future, they will have better idea of how to write things. Right? Kasi you can't write if you don't read. So before you can write, you should have read a lot para kung meron kang kailangan specific style whenever you are writing, marami kang panghuhugutan, marami kang pwedeng, hindi naman paggagayahan, but you have different styles that you can use and make it as your own. Nagsusulat ka na. Okay? So these are the benefits of reading literatures for personal purposes. Then we also have value of literature to children. So it improves reading skills, developing writing voice and styles. I think sinasabi ko, kasi since you have read a lot of literatures, you've heard stories from your parents and others, or if they've heard literatures from you or from their teachers, then eventually yung different styles na na-introduce sa kanila, they will come up with their own. Then learning content area knowledge, as I mentioned, children's literature is not limited to fiction, poetry, not limited to stories. We also have children's literature intended, again, for informational purposes. Okay? That's why we have the content-based instruction, that we are teaching content, but at the same time, they enjoy learning those. They are being taught about content, but at the same time, it is something that they have interest with. That is still academic value for them. Okay? And that is something of importance. Let's say, paano mo ituturo yung reproduction to the children. Okay? So, there are ways. Yung iba gumamit ng stories para maituro yun para sa kanila. So, that's still children's literature. And then it promotes art appreciation. Okay? So, in order for us to fully understand the value of children's literature, we'll also have to understand its history. Right? So we'll have the outline for the history of children's literature. So we have different. So we'll start with the classical world, followed by the Middle Ages, Renaissance period, 18th and 19th century, then Victorian or Golden Age, and we also have the 20th century. Okay, so let's start with the classical world, ancient Greece and Rome. So in here, there is still no distinction between adult literature and children's literatures. Okay, and what is the literature intended for the adults, intended for everyone, are also the literatures provided to the children. And these literatures are through the word of mouth. So that's what we call oral literature. So it is the principal entertainment for most people during this period. Wala pang television, wala pang internet. That's why we have oral literature. So, and that is basically how we will start it with our children sa magiging anak, mga anak ninyo. So, oral literature. So, ayun yun naman sigurong start yan sa gadgets. Pwede rin naman accompanied by gadgets, but it should always start with you. Then, as I mentioned, there is no clear distinction between children's literature and adult literature. Right. So the dominant stories before are from the Greeks and the Romans, because these are um, the early civilizations, and most of the stories, most of the interactions of people are from these people. Okay, so example of Greek stories, we have the Iliad and Odyssey of Homer. So when we say Iliad, we're talking about the Trojan War. Okay, and when we say Odyssey, we are referring to the travel of Odysseus going back home. Okay, we also have Jason and the Golden Fleece, and we also have Adventures of Hercules. Okay, so when we say Trojan War, that is the war between the Greeks and the Trojans, of course. And then after the war, that is the Odyssey. Okay, the adventure of Odysseus going back home from the war. Okay, so magpatuloy lang yan. So that is also literature for the children before. Okay, we also have Aesop's fables. These are animal tales with pointed morals to instruct children in cultural and personal values. Okay. In Roman literature, we also have Aeneid. Okay, so this is also about the Trojan War, but it is on the other side, in the Trojans side. Okay, so this is the story of a Trojan hero who was credited with the founding of Roman race. So after the Trojan War, um, this character in this story went through a lot of things until such time that they were able to um, raise a country and then called the Roman race. Next, we also have next period, which is the Middle Ages. Other call this period as the Dark Age or the Age of, and other it is also called the Age of Religion. Okay, so the most common name for this period is the medieval period. Okay, so or the Middle Ages. Okay. So, characteristics of Middle Ages. So, civilization dito nun. Of course, the conquers of different tribes. The Anglo-Saxons conquered the Britons. The common language is Germanic, right? So, and since this is more on war, and wandering around, so urging wars and wandering became part of the tradition. And if that is their tradition, their experiences, then most literatures are about wars as well. Okay, so we have the story of Beowulf. So, yun yung mga common theme ng stories before. Okay. And stories are also about what their life is all about. So the stories are about the clergy, okay, about those people who pray for everyone's soul. Okay, then we also have stories only intended for the nobles, right? So for those who fight, so purpose was to protect, allow for all to work in peace, and to provide justice. And there are only few stories intended for the commoners. Okay. Next, another characteristic of Middle Ages is this feudalism. It is also called in some point the age of feudalism. Okay, so it is an economic system during this age. So the peasants, the commoners, live in on a feudal manor. The lord of the manor gave his vassals land to farm. So what's happening is um, these peasants are being protected by their lords, right? In exchange for their protections from other tribes, from other people. Right? So in return, the vassals receive protection from bandits or from other tribes, as mentioned. Okay? And yet they are taxed and had to surrender a portion of their crops to their feudalism is important as it as it created ties of obedience and fostered a sense of loyalty between the two. Okay. Next is it is also called the age of chivalry, a product of feudalism. Chivalry was an idealized system of manners and morals restricted to nobility, and then the knights was bound to chivalry code to be loyal to God, to his lord, and to his lady. It was the idea of politeness and benevolence. The High Middle Ages. So begin with the First Crusade, they claim Jerusalem from the infidels. So it started the open trade routes, feudalism dies out, and it is then the transition to Renaissance period. Before, in the Dark Ages, the church provided structure to the society, not only with religion, but by providing education as well. Sadly, with the Crusades, the church has become incredibly corrupt. Right? Popes fight for political power. Greed is rampant. So this is the characteristic of the Middle Ages. And a lot of things happen. We have the Black Death, right? It spread along trade routes, kills much of the population. The plague outbreaks occurred through the Middle Ages and through the Renaissance. So these are the things that happened during the Middle Ages, right? So how does this occurrence affect children's literature, Right? So during those times, we have Geoffrey Chaucer, the father of English literature. So he collected different tales from different um, parts of the world or in their area, and then compiled it. And then it is said that um, Canterbury Tale um, is compiled because of a competition. Although that is the frame story of of Geoffrey Chaucer's story. So what they have what they call frame story, and that is the origin of while a particular compilation exists. It was said that in his stories there are travelers, and they are they went to Canterbury, and along the way they decided to have a competition, and whoever wins will have a free dinner in Canterbury. And what is the competition? Pagandahan daw ng kwento. Kaya naman nabuo yung mga stories in Canterbury Tales containing 8,000 lines of verses. So yan, yan paano nabuo ang Canterbury Tales. So we already know a few backgrounds about Middle Ages. So it led them to several types of literatures. Basically, since the Pope is reigning, so most of literatures are about biblical stories. Ginagamit nila ito para mangaral sa mga tao before, and they also use um, biblical stories as form of education as well, basis of education. And then we also have secular stories, medieval romances. So these are stories about chivalry, stories about the nobles, stories about the kings and queens of the heroes, the soldiers. So these are what they call medieval romances. Stories about war, yan, yung stories nila before. Okay, like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. So as I mentioned about kings and queens, soldiers, about the nobility. And then we also have Song of Roland from France. And then as I mentioned, we also have Norse Beowulf. Next, let us proceed to the next literary period, the Renaissance period, a time for a rebirth of ideals of the ancient Greece and Rome. Okay. See? So during these times, there are a lot of innovations, and one of which is the invention of printing press. So because of the invention of printing press, a lot of books were printed, which gave way to more education for everyone, for the children, more or additional form of entertainment for them. Right. So we have Johannes Gutenberg's invention of movable type printing press made it possible to print multiple copies of books, reducing time, labor, and cost. So they already have production of a lot of copies of books. This way, um, literatures or stories are not only through oral communication. They also have other materials, other form of entertainment during the Renaissance period. So, example, we have the chapbooks, small and cheaply made books containing fairy tales and other secular works. Although most books for children were textbooks or educational books, um, books of courtesy, giving lessons in proper behavior for young gentlemen. Women did not yet merit their own books. So in here, yes, they already have books, but these are for educational purposes, and these are only for women. And then, during the Renaissance period, nagkaroon na rin tayo nitong ginawa ni John Comenius, the Orbis Sensualium Pictus, or Orbis Pictus na alam natin. Right? So, this is the use of pictures. So, dito natin sa ang picture books na concept natin nowadays. Okay? Then, during this time, we also have the New England primer, the most famous early school book. So, unti-unti na nagkakaroon ng development in children's literature, especially in this literary period. Okay? So, during this literary period, a famous essay written by John Locke in which he formulated his notion that minds of young children were similar to blank slates, tabula rasa, waiting to be filled. He believed every child had equal capabilities to learn, and adults had the responsibility to provide proper education. Although this is a theory that is being argued by a lot, but somehow this is also true that we should have the responsibility to provide proper education to the children. That's why if they can't read yet, then we should teach them. If they can't read literatures yet, we will narrate, we will tell stories to them. Then sooner than later, they will be able to read on their own. Okay? Another development during this period, children continue to adopt certain adult works of literature. However, hindi na magtatagal yan because there are already literatures that are becoming intended only for them. Okay? Although these stories are not just intended for the children, there are already stories that are appropriate for them. It's about more on action, about adventure, and so on. So we have John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. We also have Robinson Crusoe. Okay. And we also have Gulliver's Travel. Okay, so these are adventure stories. So we have Gulliver's Travel, the travel of an individual who went to different islands of huge people, islands of people that are very small, and so on. And then we also have Robinson Crusoe, the story of the character who was stranded in an island and um, learn how to survive in an island. Next, we also have the change of medieval thoughts to the age of this period, or what they call age of humanism. Okay, if before churches and kings and queens are the most important in this literary period, it shifted to individuals or humans na. So man is sinful, then it transition to man is good with dignity and value. So nag-focus na from religion to man. Kaya siya tinawag na age of humanism. Hierarchy of people's worth, and then dignity of and the worth of people. Okay, so every individual has their own worth. Unlike before na ang pinaka binibigyan lang ng pansin are the nobles, the kings and queens, and the the people in the churches. Okay? Accept human condition and then transition to encourage human achievement. Accept church doctrine without question. However, in the age of humanism, each individual find truth for themselves. So it is not just the church subject. Okay. Next. Still for this age, we have the publication of a little pretty pocket book of John Newbery, right, which is a very big publication. It's big in such a sense that it gave way to the bloom of children's literature. So the serious publishing of children's book by John Newbery. So it is already between the Renaissance period and 18th and 19th century. Okay, next we also have Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the moral development. Okay. So dito na rin nag-umpisa unti-unti yung pagkakaroon natin ng literature intended for the children, that they should not be introduced to something really very negative again. And then during this literary period, ito rin yung tinatawag nilang revival of the classical period. They revive nila yung stories from the classical period that they think are appropriate to them. Let's say the compilation of stories in Arabian Nights. Right? So that is one. Then still revival of old stories of classical literatures or of folk tales. We have the Grimm's fairy tales by the Grimm's brothers. Although the version of Grimm's fairy tales is somehow very negative and it has a lot of dark things there. That's why I asked you to compare two stories from one author to the works of the Grimm's brothers, because the works of Grimm's brothers have a lot of dark things there. It portrays premarital sex, violence, it portrays um, going against your parents and so on. However, other authors decided to remove those parts and portray something else. Okay? Kaya yung version ng fairy tales that we have, we should be careful. Kasi pag natapat tayo sa versions na medyo dark, then pipiliin ba natin yon para ibigay sa ating mga students or magiging anak or magiging apo in the future? No. Okay? So, hindi porke fairy tale yung meron tayo, yun na yung gagamitin para sa mga students natin. No? So, we should still check those. Then also have other compilations by Hans Christian Andersen. Okay. So some adults felt them unsuitable for children as they contain adult themes, alarming frankness, violence, and lack of moral messages. Yun yung kina Grimm's fairy tales. Okay. Let's proceed. So let's have then a quick summary of history of children's literature. So before, books weren't always written for the children, which is true. It is intended for everyone, and it's not yet written. It is orally introduced to everyone. And then changes in printing technology provided affordable books. Since marami ng available books, mas mura na rin. Ganun lang naman yan. And mas marami na rin nakakabasa. When childhood began to be viewed as a special part of human life cycle, literature written specifically for children became important thanks to Hans Christian Andersen, thanks to moral development of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and so on. Thanks to John Locke as well. That's why there are already literatures for the children. So milestone in children's literature. So oral tradition, early printed books, the Puritan influence or um, focus on church influence, John Locke influence, Mother Goose Tales, adventure stories. Um, we have the again Robinson Crusoe one, and then isa Gulliver's Travel, Newberry's books by Little Pocket Books, Rousseau's Philosophy of Moral Development, and then we also have Blake's Poetry, Nursery Rhymes. And then mass production of books, invention of movable printers by Johannes Gutenberg. Then we also have a version of William Caxton's printing press. Then we also have horn books. So printed sheets of text mounted on wood and covered with translucent animal horn, used mainly to teach reading and numbers. We also have, once again, chapbooks, small publications that contain songs, poems, political treatises, folk stories, religious tracts, and so on. Puritan influence, once again, the story of children's reading in America begins with the Puritans, heavily influenced, as I mentioned, by the church. Restricted children from reading some chapbooks because, once again, their focus is on the biblical stories only. Books selected for Puritan children reinforce their moral development, God and for most. Okay, so again, summary of history of children's literature. Charles Peralt, so retold many stories from French perspective. So, and one of the first writers to recognize that fairy tales have a special place in the world of children. And since they have special place for the world of children, the version of Charles Perrault's fairy tales, compilation of fairy tales, remove or change the dark side of these fairy tales to better ones. So, tinanggal yung premarital sex, tinanggal yung inappropriate actions, tinanggal yung mga inappropriate words for the children, tanggal din siya ng violence, and so on. Okay? Another early influence in children's literature, as I mentioned, Daniel Defoe by writing Robinson Crusoe. We also have Gulliver's Travel by Jonathan Swift. Then, of course, we have John Newbery. Okay, Little Pretty Pocket Books. Then, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's moral development, believe that children should be accompanied by their search for knowledge. So they should be accompanied by someone who are more mature, who knows things more than them. Stress the importance of experiences in harmony with children's natural development, physically and mentally. Okay. Then still, romantic movement, the Grimm's brothers, Hans Christian Andersen, and others. Okay, and let's take note of this as well. Kung dati walang involved ang mga women. So they slowly but surely started gender roles and included women there. Of course, it's more on fantasy, adventure, and inclusion of real people. So, fairy tales by Grimm's brothers included Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, The Frog Prince, Rapunzel, and so on. Hans Christian Andersen, so considered the father of children's literature. So his popular books are The Ugly Duckling, Little Mermaid, The Riches, and others. So Anderson began to write tales that reflected his childhood. So increase some numbers. So trends in children's literature. Increased numbers of adults reading children's books, primarily because of Harry Potter phenomena. So a lot of adults nowadays are also reading children's books because of Harry Potter. So originally, Harry Potter is intended for children and young adults. However, everyone loved it till such a time that adults are also reading children's books, not for the children, but also for themselves. So, increasing dominance of illustrations in children's books, readers are becoming more visually oriented as they spend more time watching television, playing video games, and spend less time reading. That's why picture books have become very famous and very effective because we turn into visually oriented learners individuals. Okay, so fewer full length novels and more short, high interest, low reading level novels begins written for 10 to 14 years old. So short and not full length novels because we are talking to their interests. We should make sure that our authors and story developers made it sure that students have and children have interest in reading their stories. So kaysa napakahabang novels, mas gusto nila yung mga maiksi lang but with high interest and more on adventure type stories. And easy to read straightforward literatures para sa mga young learners. Rapid growth of technology in all areas of publishing as the school adopts computerized managements, reading programs, reading and books become less means of enjoyment, discovering new information, and more a matter of gaining points. So they use computers now, technology, gadgets, cell phones in children's literature. So we should think of ways on how we should use or use technology to promote children's literature. Okay. An increase in publication of bilingual books to accommodate rapid increase in second language learner students. And increased merchandising of book-related paraphernalia such as games, craft kits, cookbooks, dolls, and doll accessories. So, books intended for the children are not just the stories themselves. Kung mapapansin niyo, mga stories for books for the children, meron pang may mga kasamang games, mini games, may mga kasamang kung ano-ano na pag binuksan mo, you can have one extra other things other than the page itself. So, meron yung may mga lulusot mo yung kamay mo, and then you can have a puppet using the book. So, yan yung mga development of books and stories for the children, mainly the history of children's. Okay, so that is then the elements the quality and history of children's literature. This time, let us proceed with the art of illustration and early childhood books. As mentioned in our presentation a while back, um, children, and not just children, but everyone have become visually oriented, right? So more on visuals and eye. That's why use of art of illustration or picture book stories are very important because it will portray the stories better, right? And since mas gusto natin may nakikita tayo, why not combine this with the children's literature? Combine it with the story art of storytelling, right? So in the art of illustration, it is the combination of the art of storytelling and art of illustration. So there are different types of children's books. In terms of form, we have picture books, we have chapter books, we have comic books. Then in terms of genre, of course, we have the prose and poetry. So under prose, we have fiction and non-fiction. Right? So you know, genres, the prose and the poetry. So in children's literature, these are the common types: nursery rhymes, lyric poems, narrative poems. On the other hand, we have prose. Under prose, we have fiction and non-fiction. Under fiction, it's either about fantasy or realism. When we say realism, it's still work of someone's mind, but it is based on realities of life, such as family stories, friendship, adventure and survival stories, mystery, animals, sports, and historical stories. Okay, based on realities of life, but still based on just a work of the author's mind. Okay. On the other hand, fantasy, we have um, folk literature, and then we have modern fantasy. So, under folk literature, myths, epics, legends, fables, fairy tales, alam na natin yan discussed in previous videos. Next, we have the introduction to picture storybooks. So, the term picture storybooks is normally applied to the books that tell story predominantly through pictures with few lines of supporting text. So, if you will try to notice books intended for the children, di ba? More on picture siya, kakunti lang yung mga text. One-liners lang yung mga text most of the time. Okay, that is because we are visual individuals na daw. Illustrations in picture storybooks are integral to the story, providing actual plot or concept information as well as the clues to character traits, settings, and moods. So, yung picture pa lang yun yung story. Makakaalam mo na yung characteristic ng person in the story, alam mo na kung anong setting natin, kung ano yung mga gusto nating information na ibigay sa ating mga students. Next, we also have picture storybooks are usually intended to be read by children age 3 to 8, okay? And to be accompanied by someone older. A children's picture storybook usually comes from in the form of 32 pages. 32 pages para hindi naman masyadong mahaba na hindi na matatapos ng students or ng mga children yung story. Hindi na masyadong konti na hindi na ma-develop yung stories or information na gusto natin i-provide para sa kanila. So why do children need picture books? Okay. So, and what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversations in it? So therefore, it should have pictures. so that children and other people will be able to appreciate more, easily understand it, and so on. Children are visually oriented than adults. Children need pictorial information to guide their response to verbal information. So we have the picture with them. We also have few lines with them. So as they read the lines there, they will easily understand those because it is accompanied with a picture. Pictures usually more obviously resemble the objects they represent than do spoken or written words. However, the resemblance is not necessarily apparent to all viewers. Okay, so it is then obviously important to use pictures because as they read the lines and they look at the pictures, they will easily understand it. They will easily know what is happening in the story, and it will give them better appreciation, better feeling about the stories, especially if it uses um, the different styles in portraying pictures intended for the children. And in analyzing and in creating picture storybooks, there are different elements that we have to consider. So we have the storytelling elements, artistic elements, design and meaning, artistic media, artistic styles. So let's start with the first element in analyzing and creating picture storybooks. We have first, of course, the storytelling elements: the plot, the character, theme, style, and tone. Okay? So in children's literature, the plots of picture storybooks tend to be simple and fast-paced. So few narration, few descriptions, more on what is happening, more on actions. Okay? And no complicated plots na nagsasanga-sanga yung different plots mo. It should be simple, straightforward, and fast-paced plots. The illustrations often assist the development of plots in the story. So the picture should be appropriate with what is happening in the story. Next, characters. Characterization in picture books is simple. Okay? So, wala munang stream of consciousness na tinatawag sa children's literature. Okay? It should be simple. Na makikilala agad ng mga readers natin, ng mga children, kung sino-sino yung mga characters and ano yung mga ugali nila. Okay? So, kaya nga before madaling identify para sa mga readers yung sino yung bad at sino yung good characters. Okay? Unlike sa mga adult literatures, sometimes being good and being bad is debatable depending on the situation. Okay? That is for adult literatures. In order for them to analyze the characters more, in order for them to try to empathize with the character more on trying to understand the story deeper. Yun yung sa adult literature. However, for characterization in picture storybooks and in children's literature, it should be simple. It should, the readers, the children should know right away if whether a character is good, is honest, is happy, and so on. Okay? Kasi kung masyadong complex yung characterization ng isang character, they will have a lot of questions in mind. Andiyan na yung mga tanong nila, bakit po ganyan, bakit po ganyan, and so on. So instead, naka-move forward na tayo sa plot ng story, sa beauty ng story, they have a lot of questions. And these questions and this complex characterization of characters may confuse the children. Okay? Protagonists are most often young children or animals. As mentioned a while back, young children because they will be able to relate with these characters if these are their peers, kumbaga, right? And animal characters because obviously they love animals, they love toys, they love something to hug, they love something that uh, they can hold and so on. Characters' motivation is usually singular. Okay. And then theme and character motivation, it's almost the same with the first one. No? It should be simple. Theme picture books, themes tend to be sharply focused. A single theme clearly dominates a book. Okay, um, that is common, right? So whenever you are trying to portray something, it should it should have a focus, right? Hindi yung parang ginawa mo siyang poster slogan contest na napakaraming nangyayari dun sa picture mo. It should focus on one thing. No? Para alam ng mga students, ng mga readers, kung ano yung titignan nila ng emphasis. The range of themes in children's picture books is virtually unlimited. So it can be about this theme, that theme. It can be about family. It can be about toys. It can be about animals. It can be about as simple as recess stories, friends, so on. The harsher the themes are usually tempered by atmosphere of hope at the end of the book. So it will always it should always have positivity and hope in it. So kumbaga kung nag-start ka na medyo malungkot yung story or harsher themes, sabi nga dito, then at the end of the story, it should end well. It should portray still positivity and hope. Okay. Style. Words in picture books are carefully chosen and have to be very concise. Picture books average about 2,000 words. So this is more of use of pictures rather than text. That's why we have to choose our words correctly whenever we are writing one or creating one. So that is one characteristic of a picture book in terms of storytelling elements. So characterization, the plot, the style, the language should be straightforward, should be concise, it should be simple. Many picture books rely heavily on dialogues, which can be great fun to read loudly. Okay, so especially for storytelling purposes, it should be more on dialogues. Para whenever someone is telling it to them, they can modulate their voice, they can change their voice um, appropriate to the specific character or appropriate to specific scene. So if we have an animal character, someone can sound like an animal, like a pig, a rat, a cat, and so on. That's why it relies heavily on dialogues. They often contain refrains and repetitive patterns. So repetition is also part of children's literature para madaling matandaan, madaling bigkasin para sa children. Okay, next. So still under style and language, words in picture books are carefully chosen. I don't know, I'm sorry. They often play with words and use different kinds of imagery, particularly visual and or auditory images. So onomatopoeia, the sounds, right? Imitation of sounds are also important in storytelling or in picture story books. Right? It can be direct onomatopoeia or indirect onomatopoeia. Okay. Next, tone. So another storytelling element. So we have tone. Many picture books are comic in tone, sometimes joyfully slapstick and quiet humor. Excitement and suspense are often found in picture story books. So excitement, since it is more on actions, okay? Suspense, in such a sense that there are only few information in one page, then magta-transition ka dun sa next page, which is will portray excitement in the front of the children. Some picture books are serious and reflective. So these are the storytelling elements. But once again, we have five: the plot, the character, the theme, the style, and the uh, tone. Okay. So this time, let us have the next way or another thing that we need to consider whenever we are creating or analyzing picture storybooks. So the first one kanina, we have the storytelling elements. This time we'll have the artistic elements. So artistic elements composed of several components: the line, space, shape, color, texture, composition, and perspective. Let's start with the lines. Lines are very important in picture storybooks because it portrays action, it suggests something that is happening in the story. Lines define objects, but lines can also suggest movement, sabi ko nga, actions, distance, and even feeling. Okay? Why? How? Let's say the portrayal of straight line in a particular story, it may portray strength. Okay? Movement in the use of zigzag in a particular picture. So it may portray someone is running or moving. So what? Let's see. Okay. So let's say we have this. So slanting lines usually portray movement. And then straight lines, vertical lines portray strength, portray distance, and so on. Okay. Next, curved lines and circular lines suggest warmth, coziness, and security. Kaya nga, madalas pagka mga mother figure, family figures, it is portrayed in a circular curved lines background. Okay, let's say, for example, eto. Okay, so it suggests warmth, coziness, and security. Security in such a sense na yung mga little conejos doon, little rabbits doon, are secured in the presence of their mother. Right? And additional effect yung usage of curved lines here. Yung pag-aalaga ng mother, additional effect yung usage of curves and circular lines. Okay, so curves and circular lines. Next, diagonal and zigzagging lines suggest action, excitement, and rapid development. Okay? Actions. Okay, so this one. So it portrays movement of this character. Tumatakbo siya. And then diagonal lines, zigzagging lines suggest excitement. So these are the artistic elements. of picture storybooks. Okay, so here, so the usage of zigzagging lines, ayan, ng mga cats portrays that they are moving. Kasi kung hindi yan pa straight lang yan, you might have an idea that they are just standing around. However, with the usage of zigzagging lines and those zigzagging lines and the diagonal lines here, we have an idea that someone is moving. Same true with this, right? So, naka-diagonal yung mga ulo ng pusa, diagonal din yung pagkaka-portrayal ng background. So, it suggests movements. Okay? Next, horizontal lines suggest calm and stability. Vertical lines suggest height and distance. Okay? Let's take note of this. Horizontal lines and we have vertical lines. Okay, space. The space is usually what draws our attention to objects on the page. Open space, generous use of space, and so on. C. Space can also create illusion of distance. Ayan. Okay? So space creates attention or draws attention of the object. Okay? So since there are a lot of spaces here, our focus is only on the character and what he is holding. Wala nang kung ano-ano pang information, drawings around this na pwedeng maghati pa ng attention ng reader or ng storyteller. So the usage of space makes us focus more on the main element or the character. Okay? Ayan, so the use of space here makes us focus only on the face of the character. Unlike sabi ko nga, unlike pag gumawa tayo ng poster slogan na nakikita natin most of the time, ang daming details. Hindi mo alam kung saan ka mag-focus. And that is understandable because in poster slogan making contests around yung high school tayo or college din, ang gusto na mangyari is they want to provide the judges with a lot of ideas, a lot of things about the theme. But in picture books, in children's literature, the plot should be simple, the characterization should be simple, it should be straightforward, that they should be able to understand it right away. Okay? And then, yung sinasabi kanina na it creates illusion of distance. Okay? Ayan, malapit na yung then, meron ding examples na andito yung isang character and then napakalayo ng isa. So, the space between the two will portray distance between one element to another. Next, another artistic element is the shape. Okay, so kanina we have the line, then followed by space, then we also have shape. Shapes can be evaluated for their simplicity or complexity, their rigidity, and their size. Okay, in picture storybooks, or not just in picture storybooks, but also in other cover books and other pictures, that one element with bigger space in the picture has importance in the story. The bigger the picture, the bigger the importance, the relevance of it in the story. Diba, kung makikita natin yung mga movie posters, yung mga main characters, sila na yung mga malalaki, yung baka malalaki yung portrayal doon. And then yung mga minor characters, sila yung maliliit. Okay? It suggests what is the most important in the story, right? Or in that case, the movie. Rounded shapes may suggest comfort, security, stability, and softness. The same true with the lines a while back, diba? Rounded shapes. Squarish, angular shapes may elicit more excitable responses, agitation, alarm, and confusion. Squares, angles, right, compared to rounded shapes. We'll have examples later. The bigger a shape is in the picture, the more important it is. It's just like what I mentioned earlier. Okay. So if you will be asked to create a book cover on a particular story, make sure that you will give bigger space on what is the most important in the story. Let's say the main character or the main thing in the story. Halimbawa, yung story mo, as simple as about ice cream. So, dapat yung ice cream yung pinakamalaki dun sa cover book mo. Diba? If si John Lloyd Cruz yung main character mo in the story and minor character lang si Daniel Padilla, so dapat mas malaki yung picture ni John Lloyd Cruz kaysa kay Daniel Padilla. Hindi naman dapat mas malaki yung picture ni Daniel Padilla na minor character as compared to John Lloyd Cruz, who is your main character. So that's what this bullet is all about. Okay, so again, usage of curve, rounded lines, which again suggests comfort, security, and stability and softness. Yan, which is true naman. Yan din naman yung nararamdaman natin as we look at this picture. Okay? So softness and security. Yan. And also this one. Okay, next, we have the use of angular lines. Ayan. Okay, what does it mean once again? It suggests excitable responses, agitation, alarm, and confusion. Ayan. Just to remember in this program. Okay, so use of angular lines. Okay, next, artistic element. So we're done with the lines. We have the spaces, shapes. Then next one is color. Okay, so we have different key elements that we have to understand whenever we are analyzing a picture storybook or trying to create one. We have hue, classification of color, and then value, lightness, degree of brightness and darkness, that is what they call value, and saturation, intensity of color, 100% color or 0% shade. Halimbawa, saturation, kung sobrang blue ba yan or light blue, so on. So have hue, classification of color. Is it green, blue, violet, red? And then lightness, value or lightness, degree of brightness, right? Value. And then we have the saturation. Anong kulay ng pagka-red pa niya? Next, still under color. So different colors suggest something. When we say red and yellow, suggests excitement, warmth, happiness. However, red can also signify danger or boldness, and yellow may signify cheerfulness or cheerfulness. Right? Red, yellow, excitement, warmth, and happiness. Sometimes red may signify danger or boldness. On the other hand, yellow may suggest fearfulness and cheerfulness. Blue and green suggesting calm and quiet. However, blue can also signify sadness, soothing sadness, and green may also signify envy and illness, but life and renewal. Pag green kasi, most of the time, renewal. Same true with blue sometimes. Next, colors are used to suggest cultural distinctions. White is a color of mourning and brides often wear red in Asia. So that could be a cultural thing, depending on it. The use of black and white remains popular. Children seem to enjoy black and white just as much as colors. Value describes the overall intensity and strength of the light. Darker values are usually associated with gloomier subjects, with darker subjects, with darker themes, while light ones with happier subjects, which is true. Diba kung papansin nyo yung first part ng Harry Potter series, yep, pa-dark ng pa-dark habang nagpuproceed tayo on the next chapter of the story, next book of this story, of this movie. And saturation refers to the dominance of hue in the color. More saturated colors seems more vibrant, while less saturated ones seem more gentle. Of value and hue. So depende, right? Kung I think the more saturated, the more importance that you should give into it. And yun yung importance ng saturation na nakikita ko. So let's say if you have a specific picture, mas saturated dapat yung main element na pinapakita mo doon. Okay? And in terms of value naman, value should be presented depending on the mood and atmosphere of the story. Okay? Again, let's check value and saturation. Again. Describes overall intensity. The darker the picture, the gloomier, the darker the themes, the subjects. Lighter ones, happier and subject. Saturation refers to the dominance of hue in the color. More saturated colors more vibrant, but less saturated one seems more gentle. So kung light mood, light atmosphere, theme meron ka, it should be yung value niya should be lighter as well. Same true with the saturation. However, if you want to focus on something, that should be more saturated. Okay. So here are examples of use of different saturations. Okay, so let's say this one, hue. So we have the dark reds here, then we have the lighter ones. Diba? We have the use of yellow, still yellow pa rin naman, but the hue and saturations are different. So whenever you are writing or creating a picture book or drawing something, hindi naman porke yellow yung kulay mo in particular paper, isang yellow na yon. Depende yon sa magiging portrayal mo. You can have it lighter or darker, more saturated or not. Okay, so this is another example of hue and saturation. So the usage of green. So green, dark green here, and lighter green this side. Diba? And somehow it suggests something whenever we try to combine our knowledge about hue and saturation. Here, okay? So the darker the theme, the darker the subjects, the darker the hue. Okay, so the main subject here is the wolf, and somehow it is portrayed in a darker way. So yung Junior is darker to give emphasis with character, and it is more saturated. Obviously, same true with this one. So the darker the theme, the darker the color. So, Story of Little Red Riding Hood, China version. So, Little Red Riding Hood, di ba? Medyo darker talaga siya. So, darker valley. Okay. And then this is more of adventure and common life um, things. So the U is lighter. Kasi lighter yung mood. And it created the lighter saturation, and you here created um, that feeling that they are happy. Okay, so true with this one. Okay, so that is um, color. So we have lines, we have space, shapes, color, and this time we'll have texture as part of the artistic elements. When we say texture refers to the impression of how a pictured object feels. It gives that flat surface the characteristics of a three-dimensional surface. Textual effects generally offers a greater sense of reality to a picture. Less realistic styles may make use of texture to enrich the visual experience and to stimulate viewers' imagination. Texture is achieved through skillful use of medium, paint layers, brush strokes, pencil marks, and so on. Use of texture. Instead of just painting it, you may use different texture on it. So, another example of pictures in a storybook. Okay. And next, we also have a composition. Another uh, thing that we must consider under artistic elements. So that is the fifth. Again, we have the first one: line, space, shape, color, texture, and then composition. The composition of an illustration refers to the arrangement of visual elements in the story. Composition is important to the narrative quality of the picture as well as its emotional impact. We'll have examples later. A very important concern of composition is the organization of shapes. Grouping may be large shapes, may say grouping many large shapes may suggest stability, enclosure, and confinement, and perhaps awkwardness. On the other hand, lighter, delicate shapes, more loosely grouped, may suggest movement, grace, and freedom. Let's see. Right. So we have combinations of large shapes and smaller ones. Right. So as we look at it, so the emphasis, the larger it is, the more emphasis is given. Right. And perhaps it may portray awkwardness or intimidation as well in other cases. Pagka malaki, pinoportray ng isang shape, intimidation din. Halimbawa, yung building, yung malaking character, so they suggest intimidation and stability as well. The bigger the character, we suggest stability. Kaya nga yung mga bigger characters, minsan, di ba, portrayed as strong and stable ones. Okay. And the smaller ones suggest movement. then combine it with slanting lines, which suggest movements once again. So you can have an idea na right, pwedeng malalaglag siya from the book, malalaglag din yung part of the book. Okay? So another example. Okay? So that is composition. So arrangement of visual elements. So they have additional impact as a example. So nasa gitna lang siya, meaning medyo sturdy lang siya. Hindi siya gumagalaw. And like for this one, nakasnan ay nasa dulong position siya, may suggest something as well. Takot siya, gusto lang niya sa gilid, or may kasalanan siya. Example, this one. So, movement of small shapes. Sturdiness, once again. Next, perspective. The perspective refers to the vantage point from which we see the object on the page. That is, from what angle the picture is to be. The closer we appear to the action, the more engaged we are likely to be. The farther away we seem to be, the more detached we are. The artists make us see and think about things in specific ways by illustrating events from a worm's eye view, a small child's perspective, a bird's eye view, and an unreal angle. Most picture books give us the middle shot. We see few close-ups and few panoramic views. Only few panoramic views because, once again, our focus is on the action and not on the setting. More on the character and not on the background. Okay, so that is composition. Angle natin, hindi lang tayo naka-picture lang siya dyan. So, medyo higher yung angle natin. Same through with this one. Angles. So we're looking at the different angles on how different perspective on how we may um, look at and analyze a specific picture. So the point there is you may think of different ways or different perspective that you want um, your intended audience to have. Okay? So if you want to let them know that there are a lot of people in a particular scene, you may use bird's eye view, right? In order for them to see the different heads of people or different people or characters in a particular scene. So that is perspective. If you want them to have an idea that someone is really big, is really sturdy, is really strong, you may want the perspective to be lower. And the character will seem like very tall, very big, and so on. Right? And still under perspective, the closer a particular element is, the more emphasis should be given to them. And the the farther they are, then the lesser emphasis should be given to them. Okay? Let's say, for example, your perspective should be a happy character in front, and then at the back someone is crying. Okay, so your perspective is there. You will give emphasis with the happy character in front. However, someone is being neglected at the back, crying. So that's what we call perspective. So depending on the situation, the theme, and what you are trying to portray in the story will be your perspective. Okay. Next, so we'll have another element of analyzing or creating picture storybooks. We have the design and meaning. So natapos na tayo sa storytelling elements and then artistic elements. Now we'll proceed with the design and meaning. So we'll have rhythm and movement, tension, and page layout. Let's start with rhythm and movement. Rhythm refers to controlled repetition in art. Good picture book design creates a sense of rhythm as we move from page to page. Rhythm is controlled in various ways by varying size of the images, by changing the viewpoint or perspective, or by altering the actual design of image on the page. These changes create an ebb or flow and enhance visual interest. See later, illustrators need to decide when it is necessary to speed up or slow down actions through panning, zooming, and close-ups. So you can decide whether you will zoom in, you will close-ups, or use panning, right? And rhythm and movement still, we tend to identify most closely with objects on the left since we read books from left to right. Thus, protagonists typically appear on the left and antagonists on the right, typically. Okay? So when you are creating or analyzing picture storybooks, the protagonist usually on the left side and antagonist on the right side, or in other cases, protagonist or main character on the left side, and then the right character or 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 yung mga minor characters are on the left side. Para ang focus natin unang-una will be the main character or the protagonist. The pictures create a starting and stopping pattern for which the text must accommodate. The movement is not continually forward. Rather, we look at the pictures, then we read, then we look at the pictures again. Okay, so that's how we do it. And that's how we should also teach our learners how to do it. Look at the pictures, then read the text, the few one-liners, and then look at the pictures again to better understand the story and what is happening there in the picture. Picture books are usually designed to make a natural pause between a the turning of page so that some tension is set up that invites readers to turn the page. Sabi ko nga kanina, di ba? It creates excitement and tension because one picture, one action is portrayed in one page. Then as you flip it on the other page, or before you flip it to the other page, it creates tension on what is about to happen. That's why a few other storytellers and other teachers ask the question, what do you think will happen next? Right? As the teacher asks that question, what do you think will happen next? It creates tension to the students. Kasi bago mo pa i-flip yung page, yung next page, medyo nag-iisip na yung students kung ano yung pwedeng mangyari in the next part of the story. So that's what we call rhythm and movement. Okay, so we have here the characters. So there is movement. So So look at the picture, read the text, and then look at the picture again to have a better feeling of it. Okay, so we also have the main characters here, and then other element here. Although in this case, nauna yung other element and then the main characters. However, it portrays movement using slanting lines and others, and focus on the danger. Okay, so since it is on the left side, so we're focusing on the danger. We also can notice use of color here. So more saturated part dito, more darker, lighter on this side. Kasi papalabas na sila and a form of escape as well. Right? What else? Let's see here. So the closer the picture, the better focus will be. This examples. So kung makikita nyo, iba-iba yung mga styles na ginagamit sa pag-drawing ng picture books. Okay, so creating tension. So from one page to another. Same thing with this one. Diba? From one part to another. So, ano nangyari sa kanila paglabas nila? Inabot pa rin ba sila? Oo. Then, next part, what do you think will happen next? Nahabol pa rin sila on the next page. Okay. Next, still under design and meaning, we have tension. So good picture books create a tension between what the words say and what the illustrations depict, resulting in our heightened interest and feeling. Words and pictures work together in the picture storybooks. Without words, the story would make little sense. Without pictures, the meaning of text would not be clear. So it is the combination of the two. The narrative nature of pictures books often prevents the individual pictures from functioning as artistically complete units in themselves, similar to that of the cartoon strips. So it should be combination of them. That is tension. The page layout refers to the placement of pictures on the text, on the page. Of the pictures and text on the page. Most picture books are wider than they are high, which makes them specially suited for narrative illustrations. Because this design gives the artist ample space to depict setting around the characters, expanding the narrative quality of the pictures. Medium-sized books are frequently more complex, whereas small books, easy to handle, and large books, eye-catching, are designed for very young readers. Right? Medium-sized books are for complex stories, and small books, easy to handle para madaling hawakan ng mga chikiting and kung tatapon man nila, hindi sila makakasakit agad. And large books intended for the learners to be able to see it clearly. The size and placement of illustrations is not a random process, pinag-iisipan, but rather a carefully conceived plan that carries out overall intent of the book. Halimbawa, sa mga picture storybooks, usually nasa baba yung text. But sometimes, the text is around the middle or on top of the picture, depending on the purpose of the creator of the book. Okay? Next, we have artistic media. So we have painterly techniques, graphic techniques, photography, composite techniques. So we have different techniques. I guess this is something that more for the um, play for the artist, pero we'll have a short rundown of it. The art of photography is the art of composition. The result is intellectually stimulating. Photographs are principally for realistic stories. Photographs can also be effective in informational books. So as I mentioned a while back, we have informational books, we have nonfiction literatures for the children. Okay, so we can use photographs. Halimbawa, mga animals, obviously it should be better if we will use photographs rather than paintings or edited versions of those. Let's skip this part. Next, artistic styles. Ito na lang tayo focus. So we have realism, cartoon art, expressionism, impressionism, surrealism, and folk art. So under realistic styles, we have first realism. So realistic and representational arts portray the world with faithful attention to lifelike detail. A few artists aim at most photographic realism, but many prefer to approximate reality. It is particularly suited to illustrate realistic stories with serious content and themes. So realism. Portrayal of um, real life situations. Okay. So the focus is more on details. Sinabi natin. Realism in picture storybooks. Yeah, so details. Next, cartoon art. Cartoons consist of exaggerated caricatures that emphasize emotion and movement. They possess no subtlety but are simple and straightforward. They are often chosen to illustrate humorous stories, nonsense, and comical satire. It is a comical satire. Um, it it gives humor to a particular situation. Another is a cartoon. So exaggeration. Exaggeration and in humor, use of humorous content, comical, and nonsense. Just still easy naman sa eyes of readers of the children. Impressionism. Impressionistic art conveys an inner feeling or vision by distorting external reality. Realism gives details. Okay? In cartoon art, humor, comical art. Expressionism, um, distorting external reality to convey inner feeling or vision. Expressionism flourished in France toward the end of 19th century. Painters such as Vincent van Gogh sought new freedom of expression, rejecting traditional uses of lines, colors, spaces, and so on. The influence of expressionism is often found in children's picture books in a form of distorted shapes and provocative use of color. Expressionism is quite versatile and can be used to create fresh perspective in both serious and humorous stories. So expressionism will make the readers in awe with the unique use of of shapes and lines. Right? So this is an example of expressionism. Right? Gives them a different meaning or additional taste on what they are looking at, just like this one, expressionism, additional taste, right? And coming out of the usual or rejecting the usual purpose of different shapes and lines that yeah. Expressionism. It looks odd to me, no? So rejects the common use of lines, colors, and shapes to give more emphasis on the feelings, either images. I say the more you look at it, the more feel that you will have on a specific picture. Next, Impressionism. Impressionistic art depicts natural appearances of objects by giving visual impression with an emphasis on light. Color is more distinctive feature of this style, especially the interplay of color and light, often created with splashes, speckles, and dots of prints. Impressionism is also a 19th century French movement. The most influential Impressionists were Monet and Cézanne, who wished to convey more of the artist's emotional responses in their paintings. So, use of light colors. So the effect is dreamlike. So use of Impressionism effect is dreamlike, sometimes romantic and magical. Also evokes quiet and pensive. So, quiet and pensive mood, magical, andyan na lahat yan. So that is Impressionism. Diba? Pagka happy feelings ang pinoportray in whether in movies or in books, we use light colors. Right? Same through with this one. Although more saturated, higher value yung binigay dito, but still, uh, the effect is somehow magical. It's like a dream. Right? The absence of light naman. Still, the use of light in a particular area. This one, Impressionism, once again. Impressionism. Just like a dream, sabi nga kanina. Portrays a dream or magical something. Something positive. Something light. And impression, something romantic or magical, evokes a quiet, pensive. So looking at the sunset gives a quiet mood. Same to this one, romantic, dreamlike emotion, feeling, impressionism. Same to this one. Next, surrealism. Surrealistic art often presents incongruous dream and fantasy images. It creates unnatural juxtapositions and bizarre incongruities. The most famous practitioner of surrealistic art was Dali. Expressionists and the expressionists make us feel, but surrealists makes us think. Right? made us feel of the warmth, the peace, the dreamlike romantic mood here. In surrealism, it makes us think. Is so that to strange, unrealistic, or humoristic stories. Okay. So, unrealistic, humorous, and strange. So that is surrealism. This one. So it makes us think why they are portrayed this way. Marami tayong nakikitang ganito, diba? Next. Folk art. Folk art is associated with specific cultural or social group and is reminiscent of the style prevalent at the time the story events occurred. It's usually decorative in nature, providing ornamentation for everyday utilitarian objects. Okay. So decorative in nature. Yun naman sinasabi ng folk art, decorative in nature. So, because it presents social groups and kung papapansin natin, very decorative naman yung mga tribes natin. Providing ornamentation for everyday utilitarian objects. There are a lot of details, pop arts. And they also use odd shapes as well. Right? So that is for the artistic elements. Okay. So these are the different elements in storytelling, analyzing picture story books. So we have the different subject matters that we will have to consider. Once again, we have the storytelling elements, we have the artistic elements, we have the design and meaning, artistic media, and artistic styles. So these are very important whenever we are creating one or analyzing one. So if you want to portray security, coziness, warmth, you may use curved lines together with combination of hue and saturation, portray dark and light, and you may also consider the position of the objects or the characters in your stories or in your picture story books. You may also consider the spaces. So the more space given, the more emphasis on a particular object. Diba? And the movement of the eyes from left to right, let us also consider those. You may also use different artistic styles. We have cartoon art, folktale, folk arts. We also have surrealism, expressionism, impressionism, and realism that may have different effects on the intended readers. So if you want your intended audience to think, you may use a particular style. If you want particular audience to focus more on the feeling, you may use a particular artistic style, using light colors and so on. The more emphasis is given, the closer it is. The bigger the picture, the more emphasis should be given. So these are few concepts in analyzing story or picture story books, right? So whenever you try to do one, make sure to consider this elements once again. The storytelling elements, artistic elements, design and meaning, artistic media, artistic arts, or artistic styles. And in picture storybooks as well, let us remember that characterization should be straightforward, should be simple. Same true with the plot. It should not be complex. You should also consider repetition of particular concepts, repetition of words, sounds, phrases, or even sentences in our picture story books. And picture storybooks, once again, should be around 32 pages, and it should be around 2,000 words only. No? So these are the different things that we must consider whenever we are creating or analyzing picture story uh, books, right? So what else? There are types of artistic styles, whereas we let our intended audience think. There are, which is surrealism, and then expressionism um, will let our intended audience feel more about a dreamlike, happy, romantic picture that we have for them, right? And then folk art, more focus on the details to the story or to what is being presented, right? Because it is usually decorative in nature, providing ornamentation of different objects, yung mga use of different angles in yung folk art na tinatawag. Okay. What else? The use of pages to create tension and excitement among your students. So as we proceed to the next page, we should we should create tension among our students. The pages of picture storybooks alone will give them excitement and tension on what will happen next. Pero if you are telling or narrating it to your students or to your sons and daughters in the future, make ways to add more tension and excitement on it by asking them questions. What do you think will happen next? What do you think this character will do? The next part of the story. And what do you think happened to this particular character? Anong gagawin niya? And so on. Tanong mo yung student mo para mag-iisip sila, ma-excite sila kung anong mangyayari sa next part of the story. And since we are talking about picture storybooks, in Philippine context, medyo sumikat etong mga comics. Diba? So we have one here, Halakhak. So Halakhak was the first comic book in the Philippines. So it uses pictures as well. Diba? Then of course, before also yung usage of pictures and comics, and then they created a version of Florante and at Laura in a comic form. So by the way, Florante at Laura is the work of Francisco Balantas, and it aims to expose horrible situations in our country before. Okay, and it focuses on the love story of the two characters, Florante and Laura. Okay, next we also have the Legend of Bernardo Carpio. So, a tale of a young man with great strength who ends up imprisoned between two mountains. So, it is an example of our children's literature in our country. Okay. Then we also have Ibong Adarna. So that tells a story about the search of a Darna bird, which is the only cure for the king's sickness. So it is set in Verbania. Diba? So these are our local children's stories portrayed in a picture storybooks before. What else? Also have Darna, right? Then we also have a story of Jezebel. So the comics in our country, just like picture storybooks, were easily understood by Filipino children because of this course of characters were written in local dialect. So the combination of pictures and the line, few lines text from about it. And in addition, in our country, since we have different local languages, so these are translated into local languages. Kaya naman, mas madaling naintindihan ng mga bata. So, all in all, picture storybooks constitute an art form that has become increasingly sophisticated. So, nag-develop dati pictures lang talaga, hanggang sa naging sophisticated depending on our need. Na nakatulong naman talaga in order for us to have additional feeling about what is happening in the story and about the emotions as well, the themes of the story. Understanding the artist techniques and styles can enrich our appreciation of the work as adults and help us to make wise book selections for our children. So understanding these elements of storytelling, artistic design and meaning, artistic media and artistic styles makes us have more knowledge on how to use this picture storybooks. Okay, makes us more appreciative of their works. And if we appreciate it more, if we are knowledgeable of these things, then the better that we'll be able um, to narrate or to tell this to our students. Kasi naiintindihan natin lahat, pati yung lines, the usage of colors, the emotions, the themes, characterization, and everything. Alam natin, and then mas mabilis natin at mas madali, mas mabilis natin mapoportray yan at import yan sa ating mga students. Next. Reading good picture books can foster in children an accuracy in vision and artistic sensitivity. Okay? So, that is our discussion on the art of illustration and early childhood books. So this time, let us proceed with our next part of our discussion, traditional literature, modern literature, animal fantasy, and contemporary realistic fiction. Okay. See? Let's start with traditional literature. Although somehow in one way or another, I have already shown you a video about the old literatures and modern literatures. These are almost similar ones. So when we say traditional literatures, we are referring to stories, songs, and rhymes with unknown authorship that were passed down orally through generations. So these are what we call traditional. And we can also use traditional literatures as our examples in introducing literatures to our students, to the children. Okay. One example of traditional literatures are the epics that tells the stories of certain heroes. Yan, halimbawa yung kay Bernardo Carpio, kay Labang. So these stories are chanted by elders of the towns of a tribe and passed down through the word of mouth. Okay, and specifically for certain heroes, um, these are chanted during rituals like weddings or harvests before. And each epic, each traditional literatures are are sacred to the certain tribe and place. It talks about sometimes it talks about love, talks about hate, praise to higher being or destiny. And depending on your purpose, you may use these stories. Traditional literatures. Examples, we have myths, traditional stories that provide explanation for the natural phenomenon, usually containing deities as characters. So the origin of something, origin or explanation of natural phenomena, usage of gods and goddesses, so on. Next, fables, of course, brief traditional stories that teach a lesson about behavior, usually with animal characters. Yeah, the first chapter, Lion King, these are common examples. Ballads, traditional stories that were sung as a narrative poems. Then we also have legends, traditional stories that combine history and myth, based in part on real people or historical events. We have tall tales, exaggeration. Tall tales, exaggerated stories with gigantic, extravagant, and flamboyant characters. Gusto to, di ba? Gustong gusto to yung mga bata, yung mga characters na kaya ng buhat nila. Ganito, ng crocodile, kung ano pa. Exaggeration. And then, gamitan mo pa ng artistic style using sa exaggeration. So that would be good. Right? Next, we also have fairy tales. So, traditional stories written for entertainment, usually with magic and fantastic characters. Next, also have traditional rhymes. So, traditional verses intended for very young children. Let's say, floating for little stars. Other rhymes that we know. These are examples. And by the way, in our context of fairy tales, we have epics and folktales that involve magic and magical creatures such as kapre, tikbalang, duende, aswang, as opposed to those other countries' fairy tales. They have fairies. Meron din naman tayo diwata. Next, we also have, by the way, this is another category under, or the next part, we also have fantasy, animal fantasy. Animal fantasy, fantasy in which the main characters are anthropomorphic animals that display human characteristics. So, um, They are animals and yet they have human emotions, human characteristics. Diba? And by the way, dito rin pala, well, traditional rhymes in our context, meron pa tayong mga um, ano pa, pen, pen de Sara, pen, ayan. So these are traditional rhymes for in our country. What else? Children's literature, by the way, in the Philippines, traces its roots to oral tradition using rhymes like pen, pen, Sara, pen, paghihele of the Tagalog, and so on. Next, animal fantasy, as I mentioned a while back. So, example of children's literature under this category in our country is, of course, the stories of Jose Rizal about uh, animals. One example is the monkey and the turtle. Okay. This time, let's proceed with the contemporary realistic fiction, which is under another category of children's literature. Okay. So, realistic fiction, fictional story set in modern times with events that could possibly occur or have already occurred in someone's life. Realistic fiction attempts to portray the world as it is. So hindi unlike romanticism na pinapaganda niya, expressionism na medyo dinidistort niya yung reality. But in contemporary realistic fiction, it portrays the world as it is. It contains no fantasy, no extra supernatural elements like magic, supernatural strengths, walang mga ganun. And it usually depicts ordinary people's lives going through about their business in everyday living. Okay? They, they have their everyday experiences with joy, with sorrow, successes and failures in life. So children's literature has gradually from romantic view, when you say romantic view, it's more on emotion and pinapaganda niya yung what is real and it turned towards a more realistic view. Kaya nga nagkaroon tayo ng concept na if it started in a very dark way, which is real naman in the real life situation, hopefully the writer can come up with something about hope or positivity. Since young learners, young readers ang magbabasa ng mga ito. So, refers to the fiction portraying the world that seems happier than the one we live. That is romanticism. However, in realistic fiction, what is real is being portrayed. Subjects that were once taboo in realistic fiction are now commonplace, and languages and character developments are presented in greater candor and boldness. Okay? So, ano ba yung matatawag nating good contemporary realistic fiction? So, paano natin siya matatawag na contemporary realistic fiction? First is, a character should be engaging and believable. Hindi kagaya ni Superman, ni Batman, na sobrang yaman, na sobrang lakas, kayang paguhin yung oras ng mundo, and so on. So, they should be engaging and believable. Something that we'll be able to relate with. And the dialogues are believable as well. And the plot is fresh and original. We say fresh and original, something that we haven't seen in a long time. Plots that are not based from classical literature plots. What else? Setting is true to life. Okay, so that is also contemporary realistic fiction, obviously. True to life setting. Okay. Probably not in a castle. So not in other planets, not in a fantastic setting, not in a magical setting, whereas a character will be transferred from real life setting to the setting in the book. Hindi siya contemporary realistic fiction. And then the problems faced by the characters are honestly portrayed, and the resolution makes sense. Hindi yung nanalo ka sa lotto, hindi yung dahil sa lakas ng loob lang. It should be real. It should be based on real life situations. And themes grow naturally out of actions and characters. And in contemporary realistic fiction, the writer do not preach the moral lesson of the story. Do not preach the the lesson. Hindi siya parang like nangangaral, but rather the message of the story is revealed based on what is um, naturally coming out based on the actions and based on the characters of the story. Okay. So there are different characteristics of a contemporary realistic fiction. The first one is the coming of age theme. Okay, so many realistic stories depict their protagonists growing up or coming of age. The coming of age stories typically trace the protagonist's growth from self-absorbed, immature individual into an expansive, mature human being concerned with the welfare of others and his and her place in the world scheme. One perfect example of this is the story that I asked you to watch, Inside Out. The main character there, so it has a check mark in this part, the coming of age theme. So that is one theme of the story. From immature to being mature enough to understand what is happening around her, inside out. What else? In good realistic fiction, the characters possesses a clearly defined personality and exhibits growth during the course of the story, from one emotion to another, from a character na hindi niya maintindihan yung emotions niya into someone na naintindihan na niya yung iba't ibang emotions niya in the story Inside Out. Okay. Their growth of self-awareness usually comes from a struggling, pain, or even suffering, and then turn that into something positive. So, in children's stories, the protagonist usually reaches a higher level of maturity and a greater sense of self-awareness by the book's end, but has not achieved adulthood. Yes, nag-mature siya, pero there's still a lot of things to learn in that case, in that particular story. Diba? Yes, nag-mature na siya, pero not yet in adulthood. Pero at least, there is something positive that happened at the end of the story. Eh, sir, dapat ba positive palagi pag children's story, yung ending? I suggest that should be the suggestion, especially that we are introducing stories to our students, especially if they are the young readers, young learners. Okay? But if you want to um, get out of the box, you may do that, of course. No one's preventing you, pero um, we want to instill hope, positivity to our young learners. That's why if we have a negative one, a dark one at the beginning of our stories, why not end it with something positive? Right? So that is uh, contemporary realistic fiction. Right? It's still fiction pala siya, no? Fiction. Pero it is based on reality. Kagaya nung Inside Out, of course, that is still fiction, but it is based on realities of life, realities of someone understanding their identity, their emotions. Okay. Another example of coming of age theme is the secret garden. Okay, next. Another characteristic of contemporary realistic fiction is humor in realistic fiction. So, humor is frequently used to break the tension in sensitive situations, unlike fantasies in which the humor is often the humor of absurd. Let's say, papaluin ka and so on. So, hindi yun yung purpose ng humor in realistic fiction. Hindi siya slapstick. Kumbaga. Humor is a form of self-preservation of coping. Okay? In realistic fiction, humor usually takes one of the three forms. One is humor of the character. This depends on the antics of eccentric personality. So, humor in character. Another, humor of situation. Surprising, awkward, or ridiculous actions or situations are among the common sources of humor in children's stories. What is happening? And then humor in language. So place words, verbal irony, misunderstanding, and contribute verbal humor. So these are the different types of humor that we can use in our stories whenever we decide to write one. Humor of the character, humor of the situation, and humor of the language. Another characteristic that we must consider in contemporary realistic fiction is the problem novels. Somehow I mentioned it a while back. The new realism sought to bring more honest emotions, franker language, and bolder ideas to the picture of children. Okay? It opened entirely new range of subjects and uh, and remained that was taboo, including racial prejudice, teenage gangs, drug abuse, child abuse, mental illness, and so on. So the term problem novel focusing on a singular hot issue that affects the protagonist. Okay? So in that case, emotional and psychological yung main issue sa story natin sa inside out. Diba? And aims to not at a naturalistic portrayal of a problem of the children or of young teens. Problem novels are directed to older children and focus on individuals' emotional response to life experiences. Okay? So yun yung pinoportray ng problem novels. So problem novels often contain predictable plots, shallow characters, and trite dialogue. And they imply that teenage problems have simplistic solutions. Simple lang naman yung solution. So, on the other hand, problem novels explore significant psychological and sociological issues with sensitivity, and they give us vivid and complex characters. And problem novels also have been used as part um, of a process of honing an individual. So some critics think that problem novels are often encouraged as self-indulgence. However, it is also good that we expose children to few of stories like this in order for them to understand themselves, understand their emotions, their identity as an individual. But make sure that we will guide them as someone older than them. Right? So that is coming of age, um, problem numbers, and humor in realistic fiction. So whenever we are analyzing a story, you may consider those. Whenever you are writing one, you must consider those. Okay. Next, this time let us talk about the different types of contemporary realistic fiction. So first one, we have family stories. Family stories frequently rely on episodic plots since they are built around the daily details and activities, squabblings, schemings, and reconciliations, in which the families are normally engaged by episodic plots per episode, one episode to another. So, of course, another one example of family stories under contemporary realistic fiction is Inside Out. Parang, yes, it is story about the main character, but it still has a touch of the story about the particular family. Family stories have been around since Victorian era, 18th and 19th century, and when they were mainstay of every girl's reading. What else? For example, the family is portrayed destitute but virtuous, self-sacrificing and beautiful children, always ready to do more than their fair share for the family's well-being. And the widowed mother draws strength from their unfailing togetherness. Okay? So, family stories. So, at least meron tayong different choices na pagpipilian tuwing pipili or gagawa tayo ng stories for the children. Is it stories about the family or what else? Stories about racial realism. Right? What is racial realism naman? Although another example of Inside Out as stories of social realism, but there are others like Hunger for the Fame and stories about being able to fit in particular society. Ito yung mga stories na yan. Yung mga stories about children on how to fit in a particular group, stories about friendship, ito yung matatawag natin, stories of social realism. This type of stories deal with friendship, ayan, sabi ko nga, self-identity, racial prejudice, child abuse, sexual abuse, homosexuality, and other social issues that may involve in human growth and development. Okay, so example, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, depicting young people struggling with unlikely friendships and dealing with troubled society, which is problem of every individual. Kaya siya tinawag na realistic fiction. And the authors of this type of stories believe that it is better for young readers to learn about the harsh subjects of life from a capable and sensitive writer than from ill-informed friends or bad experiences, which is true. Gaya ng sabi ko kanina, value of literature is being able to understand and have empathy towards others. So, and have experience of what is happening in the life situations around you, cultural acculturation. So you will understand what is happening around you. You will understand people around you in a sensitive and capable way. Na pinurtray ng writers. Probably you haven't experienced problems in life. However, at least it was already presented to you in a better way, in a positive way. Kaysa naman ma-experience mo yan personally with other people in a bad way. Kumbaga, mas maganda na introduce natin yung stories na mga ganito about problems in friendship, homosexuality, different social issues sa story na napag-isipan. Sa stories na bibigyan ka din ng lesson sa dulo after mo basahin or after siya basahin para sa'yo. Kaysa na-experience mo yan first time in a bad way. At least kung nabasa mo na yan, na-introduce mo na yan sa'yo ng mga teachers mo, you will have better way to handle these problems or these situations, these social issues. Let's say homosexuality, let's say life of LGBT, or let's say self-identity, kaysa nagmamaktol-maktol ka, nagdadabol o naglalayas, napanood mo yung yung inside out, you know what to do with your emotions. Okay, so that is another example of contemporary realistic fiction. So the first one is, once again, another first one, you have the family stories, then followed by social realism. And another thing na gustong-gusto ng mga students or ng mga children is adventure and survival stories. Many adventure stories are in fact survival stories which depict individuals pit against the forces of nature or modern works, the forces of cruel, insensitive society. So these are the examples. Right? Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island adventure story. Robin Crusoe by Daniel Defoe, once again, adventure story and survival story in an island. Then we also have Jumanji, both the book and the movie, of course. Another adventure survival story. Although the difference is this one is set in the future for the modern version of it. Okay. So adventure stories often are romantic, have long been popular with children. Romantic is in the sense that it gives positive theme. Many adventure stories are in fact survival stories once again. And they are usually coming of age stories depicting individuals rising above adversity. So that is a challenge that is somehow exciting naman in the part of the children. Facing forces that are greater and more formidable than they are and discovering them. One key element in survival stories is the detailing of the means of survival. Let's say locating food or providing shelter, and securing protection from threatening forces. Ito yung mga common elements ng adventure and survival stories. Paano maghanap ng food, paano ma-secure yung sarili mo physically, paano makahanap ng shelter, and so on. Yung mga common stories ng mga ito, especially ng dalawa, Robinson Crusoe and Treasure Island. Okay, so it's about real life survival. Kaya pa rin siya tinawag na contemporary realistic fiction. Okay? Next, and of course, another, hindi pa rin mawawala itong mga animal stories. Okay. Although for these two examples that we have here, these are animal fantasies, but these are basically not realistic fiction. Pero these are common animal fantasy stories. So Lion King, Pig, we also have Paw Patrol, but these are pure fiction. But we also have stories about animals that are based on real life situations. Right? I forgot the Japanese story about a dog na hinintay yung amo niya. So that is one. Or it may not be a pure whole story. It could be just a clip or short story of how an animal saved someone. Diba? May mga stories tayo na paano tinulungan ng isang aso yung amo niya na nakulong sa bahay o ang amo niya na nasunugan ng bahay. Something like that. So these are examples of animal stories. If it is converted into a literature, it will be a good example. Next, sports stories. Right? So sports stories promote high moral character and good sportsmanship about um, uh, good sportsmanship among our students. They are usually coming of age stories, particularly when the protagonist gain self-knowledge through participation in sports. Natuto tayo, natuto yung mga students ninyo from the lessons of the character participating in sports competition or sports event. And let's give emphasis with that lesson at the end of the lesson, at the end of the story. So, sports stories again promote high moral character and good sportsmanship. Most sports stories hinge on excitement of the game and the necessity for teamwork and fair sportsmanship. At yun yung pinoportray natin whenever we introduce sports stories to them. And interpersonal problems that develop between characters. Let's say they are really competitive with each other. It may start with that and then end up being friends or being sportsmen and being fair with each other. They are popular because of their subject matter, although too often the plots are predictable, characters are stereotyped, and the dialogues are trite or obvious or common. Right? But still, um, as long as it is not really that common to the intended audience among students, you may still use that. Right? You will still learn from it. You will still get something from it. Next, another type of contemporary realistic fiction, historical stories. So, historical fiction is one way, reading one way to broaden our horizon, to learn more about the people and places of the world by reading about the past. Another important reason is to learn to avoid making mistakes of the past. Okay, so one good idea about this is um, turn a historical event into a children's story. That way, they will learn about the history of a particular area or a particular country, but at the same time, they enjoy it. So, what are the requirements of a good historical fiction, by the way? Recreating the historical period, and then avoiding overloading the story with historical background information. So that's one. So you don't have to include a lot of details that are unnecessary in your story. So that should still be about history, about a particular part of the history, but it doesn't have to be so informative na hindi na siya fiction. Avoiding, make credible dialogues and using language suited to the historical time. So if you will portray a particular historical period, make sure that the language is used, and if that is accompanied with a picture story images, then the picture should also be appropriate in that particular literary period. And this genre is now recovering its popularity, and some very fine historical fictions are written for children with emphasis on reassessing and understanding the past rather than extolling it. And reading historical fiction will broaden our horizons to learn about people and places of different country or different regions by reading about them. So will give them better understanding of our culture and of other people and avoid mistakes. Okay, next, we're done with the traditional, modern, animal fantasy, and contemporary fiction. This time, let's talk about biography, autobiography, and informational books. Okay, ito naman tayo. So, biography and autobiography. So, these are non-fiction works, by the way, describing the life of a real person. So, through biographies, young adults explore frustrations, obstacles, and achievements in the lives of all kinds of people, from historically famous to contemporary leaders and names in the news or sports personalities, celebrities, as well as those who have persevered through challenging circumstances. So these life stories can add a new perspective to young adults learning and reading pleasure. One example, yung story ni Anne Franks, right? Uh, story of Pacquiao. If that is written in a course, straightforward, positive, and simple way, that could be one of the biography that is appropriate for the children. Why do we have biography and autobiography? By the way, we learn from these people, their failures, we learn from their failures, from their mistakes, and we are inspired with their achievements. That's why it is also good to introduce a biography or autobiography to children. Next, informational books. Trade books with primary purpose of informing the reader by providing an in-depth explanation of factual material. Okay? So, kaya okay din na introduce natin ang content-based instruction to our students. The focus is more on the information, but at the same time, they should still be enjoying it. Right? They are being informed, but at the same time, they enjoy. They learn um, more than what is the content all about. They learn, they develop their comprehension, they unlock vocabulary terms, they appreciate the teacher. That's the main purpose of others. Okay, so those are definitions of biography and informational books. Informational books as well, you can use textbooks. Hindi naman okay, children and young adult literature. Puro tayo mga children's picture storybooks, playbooks. You can still use textbooks. Marami pa rin naman materials, stories intended for them. You can also use magazines. You can also use newspapers if available. Meron tayo available materials for them. Makikita them. Comic strips. As long as the materials, the content of that particular comic strip is appropriate to them, then it will be good enough. And then next, understanding young adult literature and incorporating and selecting young adult literature. So the first few parts of our discussions are about children's literature. This time we'll have young adult literature. So there are no better ways to define a particular term but by knowing their qualities. So qualities of young adult literature. It should reflect a young adult's age and development by addressing their reading abilities, thinking levels, and interests. So the difference is the choice words are more complex. The characterization, the plot are more complex than children's literature. And it should still be about their experiences and of the age levels as well. Kasi as I mentioned a while back, saan ka makaka-relate na character kundi sa kaedad mo na character in that age bracket. So that is young adult literature. So adults, although some children's and adult literature books appeal to young adults, children written primarily for young adults should reflect several criteria. Um, One, it should reflect the adult's age and development. Repeating again. So they are in between children's literature and adult literature. But still, the main thing there is it should be of their importance and interest to its intended readers. Another way to identify or to define young adult literature is by knowing their qualities. And the one quality is that it should deal with the contemporary issues, problems, and experiences with characters to whom adolescents can relate. Kung saan ka makaka-relate, kung nakaka-relate sila sa particular story or character na yan, that is for them. Simple as that. So this includes topics such as dealing with parents or other adults in authority. So, common sa stories of young adults. Facing illness or death, dealing with peer pressure. This is also another common theme in young adult literature. So peer pressure. And what else? Relating to drugs, peer pressure related to drugs, I mean, peer pressure relating to alcohol, peer pressure relating to sexual experimentation, and addiction, and pregnancy. These are common themes, common problems, issues of adolescents. So therefore, it may be appropriate for them to introduce these stories with these problems in order for them to learn from these literatures. Next, it should deal problems. It should consider contemporary world perspectives, including cultural, social, and gender diversity, environmental issues, global politics, and international independence. These are common contemporary issues. LGBT, gender diversity, environmental issues, these are common. Social and cultural differences, politics, right? And also that there is no doubt among scholars that today's young adults are really sophisticated, complex, and powerful in such a sense that they have their voice, especially with use of social media today. And it deserves to be part of literary tradition in the middle and high school. And in addition to helping students develop writing, reading, listening skills through a young adult literature, um, it can also offer a connection to alienated students, mirror the lives of young adults, and improve literacy. Of course, the main purpose of teaching young adult literature is to improve literacy, but also to um, offer connection to alienated students. What do you mean by alienated students? Yung mga students na medyo hindi makarelate sa ibang tao, hindi wala masyadong nakakausap ng ibang tao, especially nowadays na we're on a pandemic. So it is important that they should be introduced to these types of literatures. And then these are also important in order for them to know or to mirror the lives of other young adults and learn from them. Okay, and another way to define young adult literature is to know its purpose. Okay, ano na ba yung mga purpose ng young adult literature? Teaches adolescents about diverse people and the world beyond their community. It provides pleasure reading, demonstrate the range of human emotions, and allows adolescents to experience them as a result of reading quality literature, reveals continuation sorry, reveals the realities of life, provides vicarious experiences, focuses on essentials that make order out of chaos, and depicts the functions of institutions of society. Another purposes of young adult literature, it allows readers to escape into the realms of fantasy. Introduces readers to excellent writers and writing, and increases this one's important as well because there are a lot of reading materials out there. And if young adult literature are not chosen carefully by the teachers, then they will be exposed to literatures or reading materials, information materials that may not be true, that may not benefit them as they read those. So, so that's why a teacher should carefully choose young adult literatures for their students. Increase literacy and ability to analyze literature. Ito yung mga purpose ng young adult literature. Next, how are we going to connect adolescents with the literature? So these are basic questions, but let's have a rundown of it. So connecting adolescents and their literature. So as teachers, provide access to types of materials they want to read. As teachers, we should guide them. If they want something about a particular subject matter, find materials for them to read. Kasi if you will not, then as I mentioned, there are a lot of materials around, and they may read something not really good for them, or fake news, or unfair portrayal of something, then release sila ng best. But if you will suggest something interesting, something informative, something that will benefit them to become better individuals, then do it. So one key to getting adolescents to read is providing them access to materials they want. A researcher suggests an interesting approach to helping readers locate books about topics they are interested in. So you can provide them links, for example. For example, if a student asks for books about LGBT characters in them, you can give them list of titles that the students may read. Right? So guide. Short, guide them to choosing appropriate stories for them. Hindi yung na-expose sila sa mga literatures or mga information na imbes na mag-grow sila is magiging negative para sa kanila. Imbes na magiging mature sila, mas lalo sila nagiging mature kasi sa mga materials na na-expose sa kanila. Right? I'm sorry. Another way to do that is allow young adults to discover, experience, and respond to elements of literary works by examining the work as a whole rather than dissecting the elements. This is also true, especially if we're dealing with young adults that are not language proficient. students. Um, Students that are not in line with our major. Okay lang kung mga English major students, Philippine language major students, ang mga yan, let them dissect the literary work, literary piece. But if we are referring to common students with different interests in life, then let them appreciate the story as a whole, the lessons that they can get from it, and so on. Okay. What else? Different suggestions in connecting adolescents and their literature. So, suggest different types of literary experiences. Reading young adult literature, developing bridges between young adult literature and more complex texts, and revisiting texts to apply new understanding or methods of analysis. So, hindi puro um, dissecting ang ginagawa natin. There are a lot of other things that we can do for our students. No? Interpreting literature by listening to dramatic oral readings by skilled individuals such as teachers or library media specialists, and responding to literature in ways including discussion groups. This one's good. Journals and group conversation. So one way to connect young adults to literature. So discussion, journals, and group conversations. So they are not alone in engaging themselves to the literature. And they will be grouped to others, and they may relate with each other as they discuss about the story and about the experiences of the character in the story na makaka-relate sila. Okay? And that is connecting adolescents and their literature. And this time, last but not the least, we'll have the last part, exploring young adult literature. Okay, so first one, we'll talk about the genres of young adult literature. We have contemporary realistic fiction. Okay, so it is also called the problem novels. Appeals to many adolescents and uses plots, themes, settings, characters that reflect the world as we know it and problems and challenges of many young people in their daily lives. By spreading out the characters and situations similar to their own, some adolescents can see their personal problems, though difficult, are not unique. Sometimes kasi akala mo mga young adults, may problema sila. Sila lang yung may problema ganun. Pero the truth is, that is also a problem of other people. And that is not really a unique one, but rather they can find someone or find literature where they can learn from this and relate from this. For adolescents, realistic fiction provides a vicarious experience through which they learn to overcome their fears, accept their responsibilities, and deal with problems related to, let's say, adaptation, divorce, family problems, disabilities, disease, sexual relationships, alienation, loneliness, alcohol and drug abuse, and suicide. So, let's see, Rapunzel, story of them inside out. So these are stories that may help young adults. So that is one chapter. Again, next, so we have contemporary realistic fiction as a genre of young adult literature. This time we'll have adventure, mystery, and humor as another genre of adult literature. So in looking for excitement, Many adolescents are attracted to books about adventures and survival or mystery or suspense. So, adolescents enjoy the usually fast-paced plots found in adventure stories and the challenges to find out who done it, sino gumawa niyan, anong ginawa niya, and so on. In mystery novels, sino yung culprit, sino yung uh, spy in a particular story, and so on. Some young adults read humorous novels to have a good laugh and to escape problems in life. Okay. Next, the third genre of young adult literature, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. There's no doubt that science fiction, fantasy, and horror appeal to many young adults. And books from these genres regularly appear in top 10 reading lists. Okay, mga top 10 reading lists selected by young adults. In fantasies, readers can go to magical places, while in fiction, they can explore possibilities of science and technology, or both. And the horror books allow readers to confront the terrors that populate their world's nightmares. Example, you have Twilight. What else? You have Harry Potter. Others. And then we also have historical fiction, helping adolescents experience the past, explore misfortunes and triumphs, and examine the background of the current events. Historical fiction can be both interesting and informative. Young adults can read and learn new perspective of cultural diversity or cultural differences, perceive challenges associated with different conditions, and examine societal ills such as poverty, drug addiction, crime, racism, and explore almost any historical period. So historical period or historical fiction includes stories based in actual events as well as stories set in the past with little or no references to recorded history or actual people. Recording topics include war, clashes of people, quest for freedom and equality, and overcoming these different conditions. Example of this is Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor. So it is based on history, but of course the love story of these three main characters are work of the mind of the author. It is fiction, but still it is based on history. So as we learn about the love story of these three main characters, we learn about history as well. Part of the history of Pearl Harbor about World War II. Okay, next. So we have different genres of young literature, young adult literature, contemporary, adventure, mystery, and humor, science fiction, fantasy, and horror, historical fiction, and we also have biography and autobiography. Next, after autobiography and biography, we also have, just like in children's literature, informational books. Okay. So, while many adolescents read fiction, others also enjoy well-written informational books. So, authors, writers, publishers try to meet young adults' needs and expectations by providing books on timely topics that are written on appropriate reading and interest levels. So, let's say, yes, gusto mo pag-usapan yung law, pero um, write it in such a way that will have that will hook the interest of a particular audience. In fact, some nonfiction authors write with reluctant readers in mind and provide lots of photographs and illustrations. So yes, that is informational books. But you can still use a lot of pictures. Let's say magazines. So these are examples of informational books as well. And we also have poetry, drama, and short stories. Okay. So one example here is spoken poetry. Diba? Poetry, drama. Poetry, drama, and short stories are important categories for young adults, especially for readers who prefer shorter pieces to longer books. Rather than relying on classics, many adolescents look for works that deal with their contemporary concerns and daily interests and that speak directly to them with words that they understand and situations they relate with. So we are referring to common or contemporary poetry, dramas, and short stories. Diba? Bakit patok na patok yung mga spoken poetries ngayon? This is about young adults. Right? Patok na patok, they can relate with the experiences of the speakers. Bakit patok na patok? They use the same languages. Yes, some of us might actually say William Shakespeare's work, but some of us don't. Why? Because the language is different. Yes, it's still English, but still somehow you don't have that feeling with the literatures that you have today. Although the literatures that you have today, spoken poetry na meron tayo ngayon, it should still have to test the should still be able to survive the test of time. Natin masabi na it's really a good quality. But in terms of experience, relation to us, patok yung mga spoken poetry natin. Mas nakakarinig tayo sa young adults na kakaroon. Ay nakakarinig sa kanila. Okay? Next. We have comic books, graphic novels, picture books, and magazines. So growing up in visual and digital society, contemporary adolescents are comfortable with visual styles found in comic books, graphic novels, and magazines. Although they differ dramatically from the genres that educators have traditionally encouraged adolescents to read, these formats have visual impact and clip, tear down, and writing style that adolescents have grown accustomed to. So we should understand that we should maximize what our students have accustomed to. Let's say, sa amin ngayon, saan ba nasanay yung mga students namin ngayon? Sanay sila sa internet, sanay sila sa mga magazines, and internet materials. So doon din kami maghahanap ng materials for good materials for them. Pero yung mga teachers namin before, okay? So sa anong mga pinupukol nila sa amin, yung mga literatures from long time ago. Okay? Which is still good, pero as teachers, we should find ways where we can meet halfway na matututo sila with the materials that they really want to have, that they are accustomed to. Okay. So these are the different genres of young adult literature. Okay. So contemporary realistic fiction, adventure, mystery, humor, science fiction, fantasy, humor, horror, historical fiction, biography, informational books, poetry, drama, short stories, comic books, graphic novels, picture books, and magazines. Okay. So the importance of having quality children and young adult literature available in schools is reflected in International Readers Association, in which they stated that adolescents deserve access to wide variety of reading material that they can and want to read, and they should read. Okay? One way to encourage our students to read is to supplement the curriculum with high interest young adult literature and children's literature and utilize engaging activities and class discussion. Thus, there is an increasing trend to incorporate young adult and children's books in and other forms of literature across the middle high school curriculum. So what I'm talking about here is we should be able to incorporate in our curriculum children and adolescent literature that they should, that they need, and they want to be, that they want to. Right? It's something that they should want, but at the same time, something that they should be able to learn with. So yan yung sinasuggest natin in children and adolescent literature. So all educators agree that reading is important skill. However, when voluntary reading declines, the problem of struggling readers are only aggravated. By allowing students to read good children and young adult literature, educators are able to encourage independent reading that will in turn helps adolescents develop skills necessary to succeed. And teachers who wish to help students become lifelong readers must teach interesting and relevant literature. And we should incorporate, again, children and adolescent literature in our curriculum. Although, let's say, your target is social studies, there are there are reasons that are valid subjects as well. So, in teaching literature, we should help students become emotionally involved in different events and people. We should aid students in understanding reality, and we should provide stories with satisfactory endings and provide common shared experience for teachers and for students. So children and adolescent literature. So you should be able to choose appropriate one for your intended readers, for your students. Provide them with something that they will be able to relate with, something of their interests, but at the same time, something that they will be able to learn with. Hindi lang pwedeng kung ano lang gusto nila. Dapat kung anong gusto nila, but at the same time, anong dapat nilang makuha, dapat nilang matutunan. As you ask them to read, or as you read stories for them. So we should choose appropriate literatures for them. So how are we going to choose? Na-discuss na natin yung mga different criteria. If that is pictures for the children, you may choose one with picture story books, then check the different elements in analyzing picture story books. Analyze the different elements in stories. Right? Choice of words, diction, appropriateness to specific audience. Right? And proper or satisfactory ending should also be incorporated. Also emphasize lessons that they should learn, regardless of whether they are children or young adults. Whether it started negatively or positively, give emphasis with the lesson that they should have at the end of your story. Right? So again, so this is children and adult literature. Right. That's all. Thank you so much.